Hi, my name is Gregg, and today I'd like to talk to you about the theme of acceptance. Now, acceptance is one of the four key skills in my book, A Natural Approach to Mental Wellness. If you're in my course, you've been reading about the topic of acceptance and you've been hopefully doing some of the exercises during the past few days. But exactly what is acceptance and why is it so important? Many of us spend a great deal of time and energy trying to exert control over our lives. We want things to go according to what we think works best. So we try to get everything to fall into place according to our wishes. We try to control other people at work, in our family situations. We try to control our health. We try to control our schedule. We even try to control our feeling state. When we're in control, we have some sense that things are going smoothly, though we have to exert constant effort and energy to keep things on track. But as we all know, eventually something happens and our plans crash into a pile of rubble. Things just fall apart. Pema Chodron, the Buddhist teacher, is fond of saying, things don't really get solved. They come together and they fall apart, and then they come together again and they fall apart again. Of course, we wish things would just come together and stay that way. Wouldn't that be nice? But it doesn't seem to work that way. Our capacity to cope is really dependent on our ability to accept. This isn't easy because most of us have a lot more practice trying to control life than we do trying to accept it. And acceptance can be seen as purely passive or even a sign of weakness. So in many cases, our response to our failure to control is simply to try harder to control. It doesn't really give us a lot of practice in acceptance. Now let's look at four different places on the path of acceptance. The first place is way at the far end, and we'll call that rejection. This is a place where our resistance is highest and we're furthest from being able to accept something. Our response to whatever we're encountering can be pain, tears, disappointment, or even anger. We may feel a surge of such emotions, and our conduct may range from violence to pouting to just seclusion. We often find our mind preoccupied with whatever has triggered this response. We may frequently talk about the triggering event with phrases like, "Why me?" or "if only." We're dominated by a need to try to fix or control the situation or to escape from it. The next point on the path is what I call tolerance. Now, what's the difference between tolerance and acceptance? Well, tolerance is our willingness to put up with something, though we may still be deeply disturbed by it. Often tolerance is where we've achieved a certain level of discipline over our outward conduct, even though inwardly we're still disturbed or somewhat agitated. Tolerance allows us to settle into a place where we can coexist with whatever it is. Now we move to the next place on the path, which is acceptance. It's hard to provide a solid definition of what acceptance is. For me, generally it means that the issue or the problem has simply lost its energy. It doesn't necessarily mean that I like what's going on, but that I'm able to look at the situation squarely and accept it without offering any resistance at that moment. Let's look at a simple example of being served a bowl of soup. In our house, everyone in our family is allowed 4 food items that you don't have to eat. So each of us has a list, and we aren't expected to eat anything on that list. However, we are expected to eat everything else. Now, one of the foods on my list is beets. I really don't like beets, so I put them on my list so I wouldn't have to eat them in any form whatsoever. A few years ago, I was conducting a residential training program where all the participants share in the cooking responsibilities. Now one evening we sat down to dinner and we were all served a steaming hot bowl of soup, and it was beet soup. As soon as I looked down into that bowl, my heart sank, my stomach felt twisted, and I just lost my appetite. I started thinking about what I could do and all the ways that I could possibly get out of eating this soup while saving face. At this point, I was in a state of rejection, or complete non-acceptance. I could have simply refused the soup. Now that would have provided me with a great deal of relief at that moment. But most of us are good at this kind of response. If we don't like something, we simply withdraw or go in another direction. So instead, I ate the soup. I tolerated it. I kept watching the amount of soup in my bowl get smaller and smaller as I forced it down, and I was very happy when it was all gone. Did I accept it? Absolutely not. I simply tolerated it, knowing in this case that my experience would be fairly short-lived. Now, what would it have meant to truly accept it? Well, let's consider some of the other foods that are not on my list. Foods like cauliflower, broccoli, couscous, cantaloupe. I don't really love any of those foods. From my standpoint, they're fine. They're simply okay. When I'm eating one of those foods, it's okay. There's virtually no energy of resistance introduced into the encounter. So one of the ways we might be able to understand acceptance is that there's basically an absence of any kind of resistance. I'd like to introduce another element onto this path of acceptance. It's the possibility of going past acceptance. I call it embracing. Not only is the energy of resistance absent, but there's a positive energy of attraction, or what we might consider leaning into the encounter. For example, my wife makes this delicious Indian soup with lentils and tomatoes. It's one of my favorites. Just the aroma coming from the kitchen makes my mouth water with delight. Savoring each spoonful of that soup is an example of embracing life. Of course, it's easy to embrace what you already love, but our real work is to learn to embrace what we don't love, what we don't even like. How can we come to embrace a larger and larger portion of our lives? So how can we work with this framework to develop a greater capacity for acceptance? Well, here are 3 suggestions. First, you can work on moving from rejection to tolerance. This often involves a very practical change in our behavior towards things, our conduct. We don't try to make ourselves love beet soup. We simply notice our aversion. But we coexist with those feelings and we choose to step forward rather than withdraw. Now, sometimes if we do this repeatedly, we find that we begin to naturally make the transition to acceptance. It just happens over time as the level of resistance diminishes with ongoing experience. Another thing we can do is to become more aware of our own tendencies to control, our own willfulness as we encounter the unfolding of our lives. Just becoming aware of our automatic tendencies can sometimes free us up to do something different. You can even try an exercise called no blocking, which I borrowed from improvisational theater. It's simple. Just don't block whatever is offered or suggested. Let go of control and allow yourself to just give up your will. I'm not suggesting that you always do this, just as a way of giving yourself more practice at accepting what you might normally reject or resist. And finally, we can use our senses to wake us up to life in a way that goes beyond just acceptance and towards embracing. When you taste the soup, you're really mindful of the taste of the soup in your mouth. You purposely smell the aroma before you eat it. You feel the warmth going down your throat. You stir it with the spoon and you notice the texture and the colors. By immersing yourself in the sensory experience of this encounter, what is often called mindfulness or focused attention, you can come to appreciate something in a way that isn't possible when you're multitasking. The theme of acceptance is an element of many of the world's great spiritual and religious traditions. It's found in the Serenity Prayer, in the request for the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change. It's found in the Lord's Prayer, in the expression, Thy will be done. It's found in Pure Land or Shin Buddhism, in the experience of Shinjin, which translated means true entrusting in some power beyond oneself. But one of my favorite expressions of acceptance is in this short poem by the Zen monk Ryokan. Like a drifting cloud, bound by nothing, I just let go, giving myself up to the whim of the wind. In this presentation, I've been discussing the theme of acceptance as part of a natural approach to mental wellness. Now, this is just one skill, and there are 3 other skills that have to do with action, attention, and self-reflection. So together, those 4 skills become the key skill areas of a natural approach to mental wellness. I'd like to thank you for listening to this presentation and offer you my best wishes.